Hello, collective listeners. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different. I've mentioned in the past before about bringing in different professionals. When Anthony was the host, he had different people on. I know in the history of the podcast, it wasn't just strength coaches, but I think that's something I want to push for a little bit more, right? To understand the sports performance team and people who are all directly related to it. So on today's episode, we have Matt Moore. Matt and I originally met at University of Tennessee. Matt is a certified mental performance consultant, and this was it was hard for me to not like make this a 3 hour podcast, just because out of respect to his time. But the world of sports psychology is so interesting to me. Obviously, that's what I got my master's degree in, and so just being able to talk to a CMPC and see his side of the things and how they view the sport performance world, I thought was fantastic. I think y'all will really enjoy listening to him. We kind of break down why it's important to have CMPCs. What are the benefits of mental skills? How do you get people to buy in? All of these different things. And Matt was just really descriptive and did a fantastic job of kind of explaining to me and hopefully to y'all the role of CMPCs and what they do and how they can help your teams. So I really hope you enjoy listening. I know I had a great time recording it, and thank you for listening. What's going on, collective listeners? On today's episode, we have Dr. Matt Moore of Moore Mental Performance. He's the owner of this LLC. Matt, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I think you're the first doctor I've interviewed. Now we've known each
Oh,
other, for a little bit now. I mean, it's got to be going back 4 or 5 years almost at this point. We
yeah.
initially met at Tennessee. We went through the same grad school program, and I don't know if I mentioned this before. I'm sure I have the listeners many times, and they are sick of me hearing it, sick of me saying it. But I, was a sports psychology master's degree program attendee, and then obviously went the route of strength and conditioning. But that's where I met Matt, and Matt is a CMPC, a certified mental performance consultant, as well as a doctor, business owner, a lot of titles. I'm really excited to catch up with you. And why don't we kick it off? Can you kind of just give me your background and then what's led you to your current position?
Yeah, thanks, man. Again, I appreciate being here. I'm a Utah native. I did my bachelor's and my master's degree at the University of Utah. Bachelor's actually was in exercise science with an emphasis in strength and conditioning. So quick side story that I think really relates to this podcast. I was a strength and conditioning intern at the University of Utah during my undergraduate days. So 2.5 years, kind of towards the tail end of my undergrad. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a GA because I was an intern GA and then assistant coach, associate coach, etc. And I loved it, and I still love it. But by happenstance, I happened to run into a random strength and conditioning coach who happened to be in Salt Lake City. I forget where he was coaching at the time. That there was an NSCA conference in Salt Lake City at the time, and so coaches were coming up and touring the facility. And I was sweeping the weight room and stocking protein and doing my thing as an intern. And I happened to strike up a conversation with the strength coach. Again, I don't remember where he was from. We chatted for like 20 minutes. He was very insightful, very rooted in this framework of psychology, which I didn't know beforehand. And after the conversation, I asked him, like, hey, any suggestions with furthering my career as a GA or as an assistant coach? And he goes, if I were you, I would go into sports psychology. And I'm like, what the heck is sports psychology? I had never heard of it before. But immediately you started telling me about it, and it was like, yes, I love this stuff. I'm still around athletics and I'm still doing my thing, but in a different space. And so I went home and started Googling sports psychology programs. And luckily enough, Utah had a master's degree in sports psych. So I stayed there, did my master's. I still dabbled in strength and conditioning, but then slowly transitioned over to the psychological realm of things. And then I went to Tennessee, where I met you, Connor, and as a PhD student, I went through Tennessee's program in sports psychology and motor behavior. I was there for 3 years and did the doctorate thing and loved it. I really wanted to make money for me and my family, so we took me and my family, me and my wife, and our children, our two kids, to Washington. So I worked for the military at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Tacoma, Washington. doing mental performance, leadership development, just essentially the emotional and psychological side of performance, but for the Army at the time. We liked it there, but we wanted to go back to the South. And so we moved to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, which is a basic training installation. It was there where I worked with basic training trainees and drill sergeants at Fort Jackson, again on the emotional and psychological sides of performance. Loved it. It was transformational for me, especially coming from the realm of athletics. You hear these phrases all the time in athletics. We're going to war this weekend, or we're going to battle against the competition this Tuesday, or whatever it might be, right? And these individuals that I was working with were actually preparing for battle, or were actually preparing for war. And so it was crazy to, at least on one really, really small level, right, contribute to preserving their lives and preserving the lives of their battle buddies on a really, really, really small level. But nonetheless, we facilitated that process, and it was an honor, and it was great to be a part of. From there, I wanted to dip my toes in academia, so I became a professor at Miami University, which is in Ohio. Not the University of Miami in Miami, Florida. So whenever I say that, people are like, "Oh, you got to be on the beach every day and explore that wonderful." No, 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 no. We were in Southwest Ohio, so it was cold and windy, but it was wonderful nonetheless in Oxford, Ohio. So I was a professor there for a little over 2 years, while having my own kind of LLC coaching business on the side of being a professor. Mostly working with graduate students there in their sport and exercise psychology program, teaching and researching and mentoring and doing all that fun stuff that professors do. But then decided we wanted to come back home to Utah. So I came back home. We came back home as a family and have been here since January of 22, almost a year actually. And I've been doing my own coaching and consulting while also being an adjunct professor on the side. I'm at the University of Western States, which is another sport and performance psychology graduate program. But I'm doing close to full-time coaching and consulting right now, in addition to being a professor. And that includes, I was just working over the summer and so from spring and summer of this year, working with Brigham Young University student athletes and coaches. It was awesome to do that. Working with some professional athletes. I'm working with some musicians. I'm doing some business coaching, and still kind of dabbling with some military units as well with coaching and consulting. So that's what I'm doing right now. And here I am, right? I still love the psychophysiological side of performance. And so strength and conditioning and personal training is still a huge passion of mine. And I would love to somehow be directly or indirectly related to that. So here I am.
There you go. Well, I mean, you might as well have become a strength coach with the amount of moves. That's typical for the strength and conditioning
That's what I
profession.
hear. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what drew me to getting my sports psych master as well. As it was the aspect of coaching that to me is really, really important. And obviously, whatever I focus on, I'm going to think is the most important within sports, right? But as an intern, I kind of noticed that the teams that did the best were the teams that got along the most, and they were, they
Yeah.
had these qualities that were kind of hard to describe. Like it's tough to put a label on toughness or what exactly compromises or comprises grit. It's difficult to kind of really break these things down when you are just kind of in that strength and conditioning realm, focusing on exercise physiology, focusing on more of the physical aspect of it. And so that's what really led me to get my master's in sports psych, because of exactly what you saw as well too, right? The more psychological side of it. And I think, well, one, it's really helped me because even though I don't have my CMPC, I will still have people always on interviews or anything always say, "Oh, sports psych master," and I'm like,
I love that.
I kind
Love
of
it.
it helps me stick out just a little bit. But then on top of that, things like relationship building. We've spoken about self determination theory endlessly on this podcast, and it's really what I built my coaching framework off of.
Good for you.
And how I try to develop this buy-in in the weight room. So, these principles are so important to me, and that's why I thought it'd be really interesting to bring you on, because one, obviously you're great at what you do, but two, I wanted to spread the message and the importance of the mental side. I think it's really easy to say this is important, but how do we use it? What
Right.
is actually important about it, and what are the practical applications? So, my first question really is, what is a CMPC?
Yeah, great question, right? So it stands for Certified Mental Performance Consultant, and it is through the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. ASP is the organization. It's arguably the leading and biggest organization, especially in North America, but worldwide. They just had a conference actually in Florida, an annual conference. So essentially, the certification, like the CSCS certification, honestly, was, I think it came about, what, 1985, so over 38 years ago, 39 years ago, 40, almost 40. Um, it is gaining ground and it's gaining value and notoriety. And most sports psych oriented jobs nowadays, especially in the United States, require a CMPC or an individual that is working towards their CMPC. And so, how do you acquire it? Well, it requires at least 8 different graduate courses that you have to take as a graduate student. So anywhere from exercise science to kinesiology to obviously counseling and psychology, and then the actual field of sports psychology. And they divvy those up for 8 different courses that you have to take and obviously pass and get a good grade in. Then once you've taken the courses, you can start to be mentored with your consulting. And so you seek out, usually as a graduate student, you seek out your consulting, whether it's with high school students or college student athletes or military individuals or musicians or someone that's performing. You have to have a certain amount of hours within the athletic space, but you can also do other performance spaces as well, towards 400 accumulated hours of consulting, with those being mentored by a current CMPC. And so I'm mentoring, on a monthly basis, anywhere from 2 to 8 different mentees that are, most of them going through school right now. Some of them are in the professional ranks and wanting to get the CMPC. And then once they acquire those hours and a mentor signs off on them, you go and sit for an exam. And when I took it, I'm trying to think here, I think it was 150 questions, maybe 175. And again, similar to the CSCS, you have to get a 70 or 75% passing rate to be able to get your certification. And then you have to recertify every 5 years. There's continuing education credits that you have to do, and you have to attend different conferences and continue to keep up on the professional development in between those 5 years as well. So, yeah.
I really appreciate the background on this, right? Because I think it's so interesting in the different fields of what is the actual requirements to get your certification.
Right.
And even for strength and conditioning, there's two really certifications
That's
that
right.
most schools go for: CSCS and then your SCCC. And
Yeah.
one involves mentorship, one involves passing a test. And so I think it's so interesting to hear that, because then we speak with RDs, right, registered dietitians, and they
Yeah.
have a set amount of hours that they have to undergo to take the exam as well. And I think that mentorship piece is really, really important. So I'm a CSCS myself, but I think when we discuss the importance of having that experience before you're able to get your certification, like, I think that's just invaluable. And 400 hours is no, small fry.
Right.
It's something where you have to get your experience for you to actually be able to practice. And I love how it's
Yeah.
actual consulting hours as well too. How was that process for you going through those 400 hours?
Yeah, it was difficult. And, I was going to say, as you were talking, Connor, it, again, like strength and conditioning was 30, 40 years ago, it's adding value to a field, right? 40 years ago in strength and conditioning, if you knew how to bench press and squat, you were a quote unquote strength coach. Like, I know how to lift heavy weights and I know how to train people. But then it slowly evolved to, oh, there's a freaking art and science to this. We need to integrate that so we can actually be more professional, more ethical, and add a lot more value to this field. And look at how it's grown today. I mean, you can't get hardly any internships without a CSCS, or at least working towards your CSCS. And that for me is important, especially in the field of applied sport and performance psychology. Is how are we going to set ourselves apart from the gurus, the self-help coaches, the motivational speakers? Well, it's with a certification, and it requires hours and mentored hours, and it requires passing a test, and it requires all and taking graduate courses. That's difficult, like I said. And so for me, it was an accumulated 5 year experience in getting the CMPC ultimately. It started with my master's degree, 2 years, and then through my PhD, 3 years of more consulting and more mentorship and more graduate courses that I needed to check off to be able to sit for that exam and pass it and feel comfortable passing it, right? And then being able to put that CMPC next to my name or following my name is invaluable, honestly. And it's something that I highly encourage anyone in this field. It's not required, air quotes, for some jobs. Most jobs it is. And so for me, it's like, I get students that ask, should I get my CMPC if I'm applying for this job that doesn't require it? And I go, do you want to learn more? Is it important for
Yeah.
you to develop and continue to develop and learn and acquire new knowledge and know the literature? And of course, if they have any 2 cents, it's a resounding yes. Of course, I want to be the best that I can be. And so then the follow up answer is, well, then getting your CMPC would be beneficial. So it was a 5 year process for me, and I'm up for recertification in 2025, and trying to stay on top of those continuing education stuff, and everything else that relates to professional development as best as I can. So yeah,
Continuing education is the hot word right now for all strength coaches
totally,
because
yeah,
we are, we are undergoing within the next month and a half the recertification process for everybody. It's 3 years for the CSCS. So
oh
yeah, I just had to pay a little money for a little course to get some extra CEUs. So,
yeah, there you go.
but I agree with you totally on that certification standpoint because, especially in this age of social media where anybody can learn things, right, and then distribute it out into the world, and it's so easy to do this because all you have to do is make one reel, one TikTok, and it could blow up, and now you have millions of
Yeah,
people seeing this. How do you cipher through and kind of determine what is actually going to be beneficial for me, and who's putting out good information that's quality information because I
yeah.
remember growing up reading that 10 by 10 back squats is like the best way to grow your legs, and I was like, well, that sounds fantastic. And then I'm walking around with what I'm sure was undiagnosed rhabdo afterwards. And so it's really important just to see, okay, for, a mental skills trainer, a CMPC is really kind of the gold standard. That's somebody who's gone through 400 hours. For a registered dietitian, right? You can't put RD after your name unless you've gone through the
Right,
actual process for it. The CSCS, SCCC, all these things help us kind of, move through it because you can be a mental skills trainer. You can call yourself a mental skills trainer, but you can have zero experience within the field. Same with all those other fields that we mentioned. So
right.
I really, really agree with you on the importance of it.
Yeah,
My next question for the listeners and is just something that kind of was really intriguing to me when I first started off, and we even kind of mentioned it briefly before we started the podcast. What is the role of a CMPC, and then what's the difference really between a clinical practitioner and a mental skills, CMPC?
yeah. Important question, right? Um, so the role of a CMPC is, broadly speaking, there to facilitate high performance. And for me, and this was basically my research as a doctoral student, holistically, in my opinion, we should be looking at the student athletes. So what's happening to mind, body, spirit, relationships, education, everything that is going to contribute to their performance. That for me is high performance. If we can address those needs and help them develop on all of these different facets, we're doing everything we possibly can for student athletes. If we're discounting spiritual, if we're discounting mental, if we're discounting emotional, we're doing a complete disservice because they're performing as human beings, right? In the weight room and on the field, on the court, whatever it might be. And so for me, it's an important piece to that puzzle. I'm coming in from a psychological standpoint and emotional and helping you develop psychological skill sets that's going to help you perform at a really high level consistently. And so for me, it's developing awareness, it's developing acceptance of the reality of what the situation that you find yourself in, and then deliberately and tactically including skill sets in your program, just like strength and conditioning, to condition and strengthen your mind. So whether that's attention management, whether that's leadership development, whether that's emotional regulation, whether that's goal setting, all of these stereotypical sports psych type of skills, that depends on the context of the individual and the team. But again, backing up, it's holistically helping with the facilitation of you as a human being to become ultimately a better performer in the classroom, on the field, in the weight room, whatever it might be. So that for me is, at least in my opinion, kind of the definition of that, or what we should be doing as practitioners. Unfortunately, I know people in the field that um, approach this avenue of performance, of mental performance, from a really surface level type of perspective. I'm going to come in and I'm going to tell you how to do deep breathing. And then you go and do it. It's like, okay, well, back up. Why and how is this going to help me on all different levels again as a human being, so that I can use it before tests, so that I can use it in the weight room, so that I can use it in a difficult relationship, et cetera. So that for me is really, really important, to holistically look at those student athletes. And yes, your wheelhouse is the psychological realm of things, but take into account everything that's going on in their lives. Because I know you've encountered this, Connor, where student athletes are coming into the weight room and they just broke up with their girlfriend, their boyfriend, their partner. And of course, it's going to affect how they perform in the weight room, and of course, it's going to affect how they perform on the field or on the court. And so, taking that into account is paramount. Um, and then, so going back to your last question, the differences between a clinical individual and an applied practitioner. And so, a certified mental performance consultant can simultaneously be a clinical individual. And so, I have plenty of friends in the field who are licensed family and marriage therapists, who are counselors, who are social workers, who are psychologists that have acquired this certification of being a CMPC. And so, in theory, they're able to work with the clinical side of things with the general population, really anyone and everyone, student athletes or whatever the population might be, and address mental health concerns like severe anxiety or ADHD or bipolar or depression, whatever it might be, and also provide the applied work as it pertains to mental performance. So those are those individuals, but not every clinical individual has a certification as a CMPC. And so again, in theory, they're not ethically able, competently able to provide applied services in the realm of performance psychology. But then you have individuals like yourself, like with a master's degree, or me, my PhD is in applied sports psychology, essentially. And so I'm not able to go ethically and competently go in and provide clinical services to individuals. Basically, I come in as a mental performance coach with a PhD in applied sports psychology, and you could do the same, right? And then the CMPC would be that much more backing and that much more value for those type of individuals to provide the mental performance coaching. And so you have mental health, you have mental performance, and then you have a combination of all these different individuals that could be utilizing both or utilizing one or the other, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely makes sense. This is the exact
Yeah.
answer I was looking for because, first of all, it kind of blew my mind when I first came in. I was like, well, yeah, I'll be able to talk to them about anything and everything if I were to become a CMPC, and I'd be able to help everybody under every umbrella. And then I found out rather quickly that that was not the case.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of extra education, a lot of extra expertise to be able to do those things.
And that's part of the
Uh,
CMPC, Connor. Sorry to interrupt. That's part of the
no, no, no.
CMPC is the reason, another one of the many reasons why it's so beneficial is the requirement to take some of this coursework in psychopathology and counseling and other psychology based courses that usually pertain to the psychology students, the practitioners. I remember, in fact, at UT when I was at Tennessee, I had to, because of the CMPC, take a PhD level psychopathology course. And my background is not psychology, it's essentially exercise science and kinesiology. And so going into that course was really hard because all of them, I was with all PhD students in clinical psychology, but I needed to go in and understand how I can at least be aware of some of these issues. So when I go into consulting and coaching these student athletes or whomever it is that I'm working with, I'm able to at least detect, right, and see that there's some severe anxiety that's underlying some of these performance issues, or I'm sensing some severe depression. This isn't my wheelhouse, right? And so I'm going to refer you to Sally or Joe, who is a licensed practitioner, because they can 1000% address those concerns. And so having that knowledge base to know, here's some red flags that I ethically cannot address is really, really important. So,
Mm. And that kind of brings me to my next question, and it's tough because right, because the ethics class to me was the one that kind of blew my mind the most, right? Of just
Yeah.
every situation is as gray as possible, and you really have to have
Yeah.
a baseline understanding of the ethics, and then use your best judgment in a lot of those situations. And so for the coaches who are listening here. What is like, and I think this is a question I get asked a lot as well too, just having that sports psych background is, in a situation where let's say the school does have a CMPC on staff, and we notice that an athlete has been out of their typical rhythm. They have been different, and it's
Yeah.
been going on for an extended period of time. It's not just a bad day. It's been a bad week, maybe a couple of bad weeks in a row, and we're just noticing them act out of their kind of general behavior. First of all, when should that referral be made? I know it's tough to say without understanding the exact situation, but and then who should the referral be to, especially with this kind of division between the CMPC and more of the counseling side?
Yeah, it's a great question, and luckily, I just experienced a positive experience just recently. Again, I'm going back to this frame of mind of holistically providing for the student athletes and working in collaboration as doctors, as strength coaches, as athletic trainers, as mental performance coaches, as tactical coaches, whatever it might be. And so, my most recent experience, I was able to, for about 10 months this year, work with Brigham Young University student athletes and coaches. And in particular, I was able to be around the football team. And I mostly was around the strength and conditioning staff. Shout out to Ryan Phillips, the head strength and conditioning coach for BYU football. He was awesome. We were in every meeting, me and my colleague as mental performance coaches, that they had as an entire staff. And so we understood what X player was going through when they just tore their ACL. We understood that X player was going through as they're coming back from injury. We understood that X player was experiencing some anxiety or depression because of a missed field goal the last game, whatever it might be. And so that for me and that experience was so advantageous to see because I knew the doctors, I knew the athletic trainers, I knew the strength coaches, and most importantly, they knew me and my colleague who was clinical. And so luckily there were two of us that came in as mental performance coaches, and one of us, my colleague, was a licensed marriage and family therapist. And so he was able to address the clinical concerns, and I was able to address more of the mental performance concerns, the applied stuff. But again, it was seamless because Coach Phyllis and the rest of his staff and the doctors and the athletic trainers and the academic counselors and the coaches knew who we were. We were around. We would periodically come into team workouts and just say what up and see if there's anything that we could do before or after the workout. And so that collaboration, I think, was a beautiful example for me from a standpoint of this is how it should be done. Right, working in silos is never going to be advantageous, especially for your client, the student athlete, and the coach. And so the more you can collaborate with everyone that's helping the student athletes be successful on and off the field or the court is going to be, I think, the best approach. And that again, that experience most recently with BYU was beautiful for me and doing it the right way. So
So the best way is to just have a solid relationship with the CMPC or anybody on that campus, because
yeah,
I mean it's a high performance team, right? That's what we always talk about, and it's never been bad, right? To have that communication, it's never worked out where we've over communicated on something and then all of a sudden we're not taking care of the athlete from this holistic approach that you say,
yeah,
and so it's just so valuable to have that relationship, and that's where I think schools are slowly becoming better and better and understanding
yes,
the
they are.
importance of actually having sports psych professionals within the school itself, and not just uh, outsourcing on a lot of areas too. It can be tough, like because again, I've worked with coaches before who don't really believe in the mental skills training side of it, and
Right.
it's funny because then we'll kind of break it down. We'll talk about certain things, and I'm like, "How do you feel about like positive thinking?" They're like, "Well, I think you should be predominantly positive," and I'm like, "All right, well, there you go." But that's a that's a story for another day.
That's interesting.
And it can be tough if they don't have somebody who's not full time to then see the benefits of
Yeah.
mental skills training and to
Yeah.
work with them and develop that relationship. And it's funny that you say that too, of being around, because our sports psych on staff here calls his unofficial office hours coming to practice. And he's like, sometimes these guys are not going to come, and meet with me for 30 minutes. Like, they're just not that type of people. But maybe during a water break, they're going to come check in with me real quick and
Yeah.
say, hey, things are going good, and it just gives you a good update on that.
Those
And
times are more often the most beneficial when they're just walking out to practice, or when practice just got over and you have 3 minutes to just chat about XYZ.
oh yeah, I mean, that's exactly the same for the strength coaches, right? In
Totally.
in
Yeah.
the initial check in, it's, hey man, how you doing? How you feeling? Oh man, you look a little tired. You get sleep last night? Like, and just checking in on these things to then make the assessment for the day. How is this conversation really going to continue to develop? And especially, I mean, for me, we're doing something physical, so it gives me immediate feedback of, okay, you got
Right.
4 hours of sleep last night. You did break up with your girlfriend, or you guys are in a fight right now, and that's why. And emotionally and physically you're here, emotionally you're somewhere else,
Yeah.
so should we really be going for 95%, on a back squat today? I think those are all these things that kind of help us make these decisions on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
For schools who are looking into the benefits of mental skills training, or strength coaches who are trying to best integrate it with their program, could you kind of give me your quick elevator pitch for mental skills training?
Yeah, I mean, I think you had a great sales pitch just barely with self-talk. I mean, we all know the
Yeah.
power of thought and how it affects our emotions and ultimately our behaviors. That alone, I think, should paint a little picture, a little beautiful picture of the efficacy behind mental skills training. But I mean, you think of the psychophysiological realm of performance, and even just the literature, and it's vast, from mind body connection to stress management to mindfulness training to psychological skills training to attentional focus, emotional regulation, leadership development. I mean, these are all things that are going to be hugely beneficial in the weight room and on the field slash court. And so, it's funny, as you were speaking, I thought back to when I was an intern strength and conditioning coach at the U, and I was working with the football team. When I say the U, I mean the University of Utah, because we're from out here in the West, and the real
Yep.
U is the
The Western
University of
Union.
Utah and not Miami. Anyways, so I was helping a large defensive lineman on I think they were doing a 3 RM 3 rep max back squat. And I remember, and this was before I even knew about sports psychology. And I'm not putting myself on a pedestal at all, but just trying to paint a little picture of what this could look like if you know next to nothing about sports psychology. He was getting ready to go do it. And I go, wait, Sione, before you get under the bar, just close your eyes for like 10 seconds. Picture yourself getting under the bar, putting it on your back, taking it off the rack, stepping back maybe 2 steps, going down 3 times, and coming back and re-racking. He's like, okay. So he did it. And he did it successfully. And I'm not saying that was the sole driving force behind him successfully completing his back squat. But of course, I think it was advantageous, especially in retrospect, because you're utilizing mind body connection. What you tell yourself has a lot of power. And that, again, in retrospect, is mental rehearsal. And so, including imagery, including visualization, including self talk before, during, and or after a workout is going to only facilitate the process, in my opinion. And I know there's literature that can support this as it pertains to gains, right? To performing better and performing more consistently. So whether that's you as a head strength coach bringing a CMPC in before a workout and giving a 3 minute spiel on imagery, I think is going to be hugely beneficial. Or maybe after, to relax and help with the recovery process, whether it's imagery or attention management or goal setting. Again, integrating these coaches, or maybe you yourself somehow figuring out how I can just lightly touch on visualization or imagery within my strength and conditioning program, is going to be hugely beneficial. I know there's zero strength coaches out there, no matter how old you are, that could agree with this notion of mind-body connection. And that for me is what it's all about. If you can support that and address that deliberately, like bringing in a CMPC, man, it's just going to be to that much more advantage for you and your program and your student athletes. So
I love that example. I mean, because it just brings me back to something where I don't know if you ever got the opportunity to meet Coach Fitz, Craig Fitzgerald at
Yeah, I
TCU.
met him once. Crazy.
Yep,
He's
yep. So
awesome. He's crazy.
he's amazing. I was
Yeah.
a GA for him. I
Oh, that's
loved
great.
every moment. But he's like the stereotypical strength
He
coach. Like when
is.
people
Yeah,
think
that's
about
why I'm
strength coaches,
smiling
it's
right
like
now. Yeah.
yeah, it's like the gravel voice, loud, yelling,
Energy's
physical,
out the roof.
energy.
Yep.
Yep, 100%. And he gave me a tool that I use all the time with our athletes. And it's so funny because again, like this is somebody who, under the stereotypical view wouldn't, be like the mental performance side of it, right?
Yeah.
Or focus on this. But we had campers come in one day. And he said, "All right, I want everybody to put your hands together." And he said, "I want you to rub your hands together, and I want you to repeat after me." And I said, "I feel great." And then they all said, "I feel great." And he said, "Today's going to be a great day." And then they all said, "Today's going to be a great day." And then we repeated it louder and louder and
I'm
louder
sure
until
there
they're
was some
screaming.
colorful language in there, right, with Coach Fitz?
What actually, because we're working with 8-year-olds, he
Oh,
reined it in just a
8-year-olds.
little
Okay,
bit.
okay, okay. Yeah. Keep going.
Yeah,
Sorry.
but he taught us if this was an elite camp for sure. But he was teaching those athletes in that moment just for 1 second, right? What is your mentality? What's your view on the day? And you have the power over how you view that day.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because it just makes me think of all the things that it's just flooding to me right now that I do that I don't even really think of as mental skills training, but it's just been so ingrained in what I've seen. And, like as soon as people get ready to go underneath the bar, like you're saying, and anytime I see any amount of negativity on their face, I just say quickly, I just say, "Hey, if you think you're going to fail, you're going to fail." And I was like, "But if you think you're going to do it, you're going to do it."
Yeah.
And 100% of the time they're like, all right, and they
Yeah.
go underneath, and and then I can see if they still think they're going to fail. You can see the look on their face.
Yeah.
But just small things like this, and even for our women's team, we did a quick visualization exercise. We had them do the
Cool.
chair on the beach, right? And afterwards, I was like, "Well, how do you guys feel? Like, do you guys feel more relaxed?" Because the goal of this was to be more relaxed, and I was like, "Just show of hands," and everybody raised their hands. And I was like, "Okay," so I was like, "Imagine using that tool." In a context of confidence. Imagine using that
Mhm.
tool in a context of, in any way or anything that you're struggling with within your sport. Imagine using that and allowing that to be the feeling that you get from using this. And so the whole field, I mean, this podcast could really be 7, 8
Totally.
days long.
Yeah.
We could go
Yeah.
endlessly, but
Well, just this
uh,
concept of breathing. I mean, you tell me, Connor, how important is breathing in resistance training, cardiovascular training, aerobic, anaerobic training?
it's it's essential. It's
It's
essential.
paramount, right?
Yep.
But
Yep.
oftentimes we don't spend, and when I say we, I mean broadly speaking as professionals, we don't spend deliberate time teaching athletes how to breathe and breathe
Yep.
deliberately with purpose and doing it efficaciously. That's part of the psychology, emotional connection, that mind body connection, bringing the breath in to facilitate literally your performance, to bench more, to run faster, whatever it might be. So, just that concept of breathing alone, I think, could be more than enough to spend months and months figuring out how to incorporating it more effectively into your program.
No, I mean the Lakers. Or sorry, not the Lakers. The Warriors have a breathing coach, right? I
Yeah,
mean, like it's a high level thing, but I'm even the course we mentioned earlier is about developing the core, right? And I'm looking
yeah,
through it, and the first thing they talk about is breathing, and then I'm like reflecting back on it, and I'm like, have I fit in this narrative that basketball players are tall and that's why they all have bad backs, or maybe I didn't really spend enough time teaching them how to brace,
yeah,
and so if you apply it to the mental side of it, right, like I always talk with recruits too, and I kind of like always try to help them, and because you speak to 10 recruits, maybe one comes, right? But I always try to explain to them like you need the mental skills side of this because you're going to come to school and you're going to get put in a blender. Like the summer's great because the summer is 4 hours of basketball, 4 hours of lifting.
yeah,
And then you're taking one class and it's finger painting because it's your first class in school. Even if you're long distance with your boyfriend or girlfriend or partner, you might suck. but you're still not in that point where you're like, well, is this the conversation? Are we ending this? How are we going to work through this? Right. And then all of a sudden we get to school, we get to practices, we start practicing for 2.5 hours. Now you're in finals. Now we also have to travel for Thanksgiving. You're not going to see your family during these holidays. All this rush of noise is just going to come
Mhm.
in. And how are you going to handle those moments? And that's why I tell them I'm big on breathing. I'm big on learning how to calm the noise. Like we do float tanks for our guys and girls here, and just things that kind of help give them a break. And so that would be my pitch to it as well, is just like the ability to calm everything down and just for 1 second, just take a deep breath and just allow yourself to have 1 second to yourself.
Right, right. It reminds me of a quick example that I frequently share with athletes and coaches as well. It's this concept of emotional regulation and reinterpreting your physiological responses to stress, anxiety, etc. Like butterflies, like throwing up, like having to go to the bathroom. Maybe it's before a workout, maybe it's before competition, maybe it's before a big test. And so, again, I think this might be something really easy to incorporate into a strength and conditioning program. That's why I want to share it. Let me illustrate it with just a quick story. So Rafa Nadal, right, one of the best tennis players to ever do it. I know he's probably not as good as Roger Federer or Djokovic, but nonetheless, one of the best to ever do it. He was being interviewed pre-match. I don't remember the match. Don't quote me on it. Maybe it was the U.S. Open. Anyways, and the interviewer asked him, "Hey, Rafa, how you feeling? You ready for the match?" And Rafa goes, "Yeah, I'm ready. I've been antsy, walking around the locker room, had to go to the bathroom a couple of times. I felt a little nauseous, but I'm ready to go." And the interviewer's like, "Okay, is this going to be detrimental to your performance?" And Rafa goes, "Oh, no, 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 no. It's how I know that I'm ready." And so his interpretation of quote unquote nerves was facilitative. And we as human beings have that power. I mean, the theory is called reversal theory. I believe it was by Kerr as the author. It's essentially reversing how you're interpreting physiological responses to stress. And this can be in the weight room, this can be in classroom, this can be relationships, whatever it might be. It's a really simple tactic, but nonetheless, really, really powerful. So incorporating something like that, I think can and will be hugely beneficial for sure.
So for coaches who are listening, and I think we probably convinced them just a little bit to look into it a little bit more.
Hopefully.
What's a good place to start? Hopefully so. What's a
Yeah.
good place to start? Do you have any resources you recommend? Any books? Where should they look?
Yeah. God, there's so many books. And maybe you experience this too. You say, I've read so many books on this stuff, but then like only one comes to mind when there's
A hundred
like
percent.
50 books out there that you just love. So books, I would honestly, I would start with two because they're foundational to the field of feedback, coaching, psychology, and just approaching life with an effective mindset. One is growth mindset or just mindset. I think the actual title is mindset, but it touches on this concept of fixed versus growth mindset. And it's by Carol Dweck. She's a researcher out of Stanford. Amazing book, amazing concept and theory and model to be able to approach how am I coaching and what am I saying and when am I saying it to my student athletes. That's hugely beneficial. And you can use that through this concept of growth mindset. Another wonderful book that I just read, and it might sound odd because of the population and the context of the book, but it's called, and now I'm blanking on the book. It's about a a survivor who went through Auschwitz as a Holocaust
Mm.
survivor. Chosen? No, 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 no. Give me 2 seconds, and maybe you can edit this, Connor.
Yeah, we can.
Hold on. I gotta look up the book, and I just read it. Okay, here we go.
All right, I'll go quick clap just for our editor.
Okay.
All right.
All right, here's one book. Just read it. The context might sound a little odd where it's coming from, but I think it can really relate to just resiliency and grit and a lot of wonderful things. So the author is Edith Eva Eger. She's a psychologist, and she wrote a book called The Choice: Embrace the Possible. And it's about her experience going through Auschwitz and the Holocaust and surviving. But not only surviving, coming out stronger, coming out more resilient. There's so many little tidbits within her story that you can utilize and illustrate as a coach for your student athletes. So when they're having to get up for 5 a.m. workouts and then go to study hall and then go to class and then go to this and this and this, being a student athlete isn't easy. You can use these examples of really going through something hard like the Holocaust to illustrate this is how we can be more resilient as student athletes. This is how we can cultivate more grit, more optimism, more self-compassion, etc. So that's another book I think that would be hugely advantageous. And then, ASP's website. So again, ASP is the Association for Applied Sports Psychology. Their website, I think you can just type in ASP or Association for Applied Sports Psychology, and it'll populate. And they have really anything and everything related to sport and performance psychology there, from literature to finding current CMPCs. The wonderful thing I think about their website is you can geographically type in the location of where you're at. So whether it's in North Carolina or where I am in Utah, you can type in, where are the nearest CMPCs, and it's going to populate a bunch of CMPCs that are nearest to your location that you can connect with, whether that's just connecting to say hello and gaining some information in a relationship, or maybe you want them to work with you, individually as a coach, or maybe with your student athletes. So I think that's a hugely beneficial thing as well. And just discovering, again, anything and everything sport and performance psychology related through the ASP website, Association for Applied Sports Psychology. So
Fantastic resources. I mean, seriously, and I love that you mentioned the aspect of it, right? Because as strength coaches, we read so much, right, and we try to interpret so much, but then what helps me is talking to somebody who's actually gone through it and has experienced it and said, well, this certain section didn't necessarily work for me the best, but I kind of changed it here or whatever was necessary for the practical application portion of it. So, I think that's a fantastic piece to it. And it cracks me up. You mentioned, I mean, again, I've read a lot of sports psych books as well too, and the only one that ever pops up in my head is "It Takes What It Takes,"
yeah,
and the more of the
Trevor
neutral thinking.
Moawad is awesome. I love Trevor's stuff.
Amazing.
Yep.
Yep. And we actually, as a team on our women's team, read the book together, and then we would
Oh,
go chapter
good.
by chapter and break it down. And it was, it was so interesting to see how the first couple of chapters, the team would, yeah, this is, neutral thinking. It's cool. Like I guess you don't want to get too high with the highs and too low with the lows. And then now, what's worked out so perfectly is we are playing games and going back and reading a chapter and then
Oh,
interpreting
awesome.
it. And then they'll come up with in-game examples, and it was so cool because even in one game we came out, we scored 15 points to their 2 to start, and it was like, let's go, like this was our first game we played. It was a scrimmage, and so everybody's excited, everybody's freaking out, and we got too high, and then all of a sudden they come back on a massive run, and now halftime we're down by 6.
Mm-hmm.
And so then everybody got too low and kept it going. And then in the fourth quarter, we come back and we kept it neutral.
Yeah.
And so we got to give them this real life example. And so I think that would be my advice to strength coaches as well too, is finding ways to continually work on it, right? Because everybody can back squat once, and your legs will get super sore, and you'll remember that experience, and maybe you'll be just a little bit stronger. But you back squat weekly, you're guaranteed to get stronger. You're guaranteed to improve. And so
Yeah.
finding ways to continually apply it as well too, I think will be really beneficial.
Yeah.
For your personal business, one of my questions would be kind of what are the services that you provide? And, obviously strength coaches could possibly outsource to you as well if they're interested. I think you'd be a home run of a pick, but can you kind of just talk to me about your business a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for doing that. Just quickly, I remember listening to Trevor Moawad's "It Takes What It Takes" last year on audio for the first time. I'd known about his work for quite a while, and unfortunately, he passed away. But the audio was awesome. I remember reading it and being done and thinking, "This is so simple, but
Yep.
so powerful." Like that essentially right there is neutral thinking and Trevor Moawad's work. Anyway, so yeah, so my business. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to do this. I am doing my own coaching and consulting business in and around sport and performance psychology. And so when I say that, what do I mean in and around? Well, it's athletes and it's coaches, of course, within the athletic space. But it's business persons, it's musicians, it's military, it's really anybody wanting to perform. If they have an objective in mind, you need to get behind the behaviors, right? That objective requires. I want to help facilitate that. So whether it's emotional regulation that we're working on, whether it's self confidence, which arguably is 99.9999% of what I do with a lot of individuals, is helping them strengthen self confidence, where we all struggle with it. It's so fickle. And that's one of the overarching things that we work on together. Or maybe it's goal setting and mapping out, how you can accomplish XYZ in a year or in a month. Being able to facilitate that. One thing that I'm really falling in love with lately, Connor, is leadership development with coaches. And so, if you're a strength coach wanting to unpack what leadership means to you and what it looks like and how you want to be a better leader for your staff, for your student athletes, etc. I'd love to help. There's certain again behaviors, action items, etc. that you can get behind to be the best leader that you can possibly be. And I'm going to approach it from a science practitioner lens. We're going to bring in all the literature and all the science, and then make it super applicable and super digestible for you as as an individual or in the individuals that you're working with. And so a whole host of things. Really, for me, it's human performance. It's not just mental skills. And so being able to facilitate that and being a better human is what I want to do, because I'm under the strong opinion that if a better human being is going to make a better athlete, it's going to make a better leader, it's going to make a better student, whatever it might be. So yeah,
I love the concept that coaches can get coached, right? I mean, that's
so
like
do I.
so exciting to me too because you know, we were even just talking about it. We had a tough loss last night, right? And it was something where I put a lot of the blame on my own shoulders. Like, we went to overtime and we were fatigued, and like my
Yeah,
job is strength and conditioning. And so
yeah,
I'm in a funk this morning. And what's so nice is that I've learned just through my careers to reach out to other people and really talk to them, because the more you go inward, the more you're just going to start fighting with yourself, right?
yes,
And I got coached this morning by another coach. And it
awesome.
was an informal process. It was kind of the office hours we talked about earlier, but what he said to me is exactly what I would have said to him, right? But I needed to hear from somebody else because, especially in a world like strength and conditioning, any world like you talk about, self confidence is so key, and understanding that things are it really distorted from the lens that you're viewing it from, because you're viewing it of yourself, right?
Yeah,
An ACL happens on any team, a strength coach is immediately going to blame themselves, right? Whereas an ACL happens on another team, the first thing I think of is, man, that strength coach, like he's going through it himself or she's going through it themselves, like, and that is not their fault because there's so many factors, so many different things that go into it.
yeah,
And so the coaches being coached aspect to me is so valuable because it allows you to get external feedback, things that are not coming from yourself and that are not biased, because you're going to be extremely biased to yourself.
yeah. Really
And
quick, Connor,
it, yeah,
along
go
those
ahead.
same lines, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but especially at a high performance level, major college athletics into the professional ranks, we forget the coach needs to be coach model. Like they're
Yep.
still having to perform, and they have so much pressure. Who's mentoring them? Who's coaching them? And more often than not, it's no one really. Maybe an informal conversation once a year with a colleague or with a staff member. I remember distinctly sitting down with a really high performance women's basketball coach, and we were 3 minutes into the conversation, and she broke down because she didn't have that mentor coaching relationship with somebody else. In her words, there was no one that she could talk to, there was no one that she could lean on, and she's at the highest level of college athletics. And so, I think we need to address that, whether you're an actual coach or whether you're a performer or a person like me in applied sports psychology and performance psychology. It's imperative that we also help the coaches. Yes, the student athletes are important, but who's leading them? How's their emotional health? How's their mental health? I think that's something that needs to be addressed for sure.
Well, like you said, for this high performance model, if you get there, what you typically have seen is you're the head coach, you're supposed to help your assistants. Like,
Yeah,
like you're the mentor now for everybody else. So not only for your athletes, but also the people, your colleagues that you work with, and people who are, in a very basic term, underneath you, or you're supposed
Right.
to pour into them. So, again, like you can't pour from an empty cup, right? And so I think it's a really, really important piece that you mentioned. And
Yeah.
what's so cool is there's a coach I've worked with in the past. He records every practice and he has his own mic on him, and he does content creation, right?
Wow.
But what he will do though is he will send that full practices to a CMPC and have them break down. And then it'll go to specific moments where he's like, man, I really didn't like this interaction with this player. How could I do it better? And they go back and they watch film on it.
Oh
So
my
not only can you
gosh.
get coached, you got film you can go
That's
to too.
amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
Good for him.
So hey, potentially something that you can do as well too.
Yeah, there we go. There's a business idea.
Oh yeah. So, well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, I really enjoyed our conversation, and I really think the listeners will enjoy it as well. If somebody does want to reach out to you, if somebody does want to get in contact with you, whether it be social media, email, what would be the best way?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks again, Connor. This has been so fun. I love just chatting this stuff up. So email would be, one of the easiest ways to ask direct questions. It's Dr. moreperformance at gmail.com just right now. That will probably change in the near future. But as of right now, that's where you can contact me, at least via email. And then on Instagram and Twitter/X, I believe my handle, I never know it until I'm like, actually, I think it's Matt J, just the letter J, More 11, at Matt J More 11. You can follow me on there. I'm posting at least twice a week, maybe sometimes three times a week, just anything and everything related to human performance. So would love to have a follow. And if you have any questions or want to work or want to just chat, please just let me know for sure.
It's awesome. And I do want to give you the floor for just 1 second. Is there anything that you would like to say to the strength coaches listening? Anything that you feel like you want to kind of make sure that they know before we wrap up the podcast?
Yeah, great question. Um, having dabbled in this world of strength and conditioning just for a little bit at a high level, you strength coaches are in a very influential position. I mean, you are with your student athletes way more than anyone else, and that includes partners and boyfriends and girlfriends. And so, why not utilize that time in the most effective way? And know that you're addressing mental health concerns, emotional concerns, relationship concerns. You don't need to be a therapist. You don't need to be a CMPC, but being able to address those and bring in individuals that can address those, I think is really, really, really advantageous because of the position that you are in. You have so much influence over these athletes that it would be a disservice, in my opinion, to not address those in a respectful, loving way. I think you can still be loving and still be a wonderful strength and conditioning coach at the highest level. So,
That's an amazing point. And one of our most recent episodes, we were talking about the uncomfortability of correcting technique, right?
yeah,
And just like when you first start out as a coach, you're like, man, I don't even want to tell this guy to squat lower because like it's kind of awkward. I feel like like just that kind of like coaching aspect of just when you first get into it, how to get over that. But you brought up an even better point: is there's conversations that are really uncomfortable to have, but at the same time, like you said, you were as a coach are one of the most influential people, so address those conversations. Don't let things go by because there's this uncomfortable small piece to it. It's really important that you make sure you have those conversations. Those players can reach out to you and you can help them find resources if it's something you can't help them with immediately.
absolutely. Love it, man.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah, appreciate it.